Hello, everyone. My name is Abrahan Nevarez, and I'm the code development lead at NIHAX. I'm a senior IT major at University of Florida, and welcome to Introduction to Python Backend Edition. As the name implies, we'll be going through Python as well as going with a backend focus. So let's talk about our contents and what we'll be covering for this presentation. So first of all, we're going to be talking about what is Python, and from there, we're going to transition to Python basics, for loops, classes, as well as some various other things that also are common in Python and that you might know in other languages, but might have a different form. And then from there, we'll be moving towards how is Python used in the backend, as Python is commonly used in many different things, such as AI, game development, data science, backend. But in this case, we'll be using it primarily as a backend, and we'll be making a demo at the very end. And then after that, I'll be showing some examples of backend code using two popular frameworks called Flask and Django. I'll also be providing a section where you can basically get some guides that I personally recommend to use for Flask. This covers a lot more things in depth, such as rendering, as well as authentication, and some other things that are very helpful. And then we'll finally have our demo, which is a live coding session of making a simple API using Flasker, using both a query and a JSON parameter type system. This is often what you'll be seeing as a backend developer, where you'll be getting information from the user and from both the front end as well as through a query through a URL. And let's get started with that out of the way. What is Python? Okay, so Python is a language commonly associated with English. It is very simple to read, and it's supposed to be simple to read as a entry-level programming language. Now, most often, it is used in the ML, AI, data science, and backend fields. It uses something called duck typing, which is very different from your statically typed languages like Java, C, or C++, in which you have very ambiguous typing. This can be both a double-edged sword in which that you can have a variable that may be a something type, and then as you change it later on, it may be able to mutate into a different type. This can be problematic as you want to be able to keep track of what type it is, especially when you're doing different methods on that type and manipulating it. Now, because of its not being able to assign, it's able to interpret. And since it's a very interpretive language, it can be interpreted on the fly. However, this interpretation is, again, both a double-edged sword. It can also be extended to make GUIs through the popular frameworks tkinter, PySide2, PyQt, and can be used to make games as well as Pygame or the popular game engine Godot. Now, here's an example of a string in Python in which you're simply declaring a variable. You do not need a type, and you're simply assigning it a string variable or a string value. Now, we want to start off with the basics. So provided this is URL to install Python, this URL will also be provided in the chat as well. When you're installing Python, it's best to always install Python 3. It has the most up-to-date version of Python. Using Python 2 is not terrible. However, Python 3 is a more common way to go. You always have much more accessible, and it also has a more up-to-date information about the language. Now, let's talk about some Python basics. So for every language, there is a thing called Package Manager that allows you to install frameworks or libraries. For this case, for Python, it's called pip. So depending on your version of Python, you may have pip2 or pip3. However, if you define an environment variable for pip, this will basically be whatever you define as either pip2 or pip3, which will now become pip. A very key important thing to do whenever it comes to making packages or distributing projects is to always use a requirements.txt. Now, the best way to do this is to use something called pip-freeze, which lets you export all your packages that you have installed locally into a requirements.txt. This is very similar to Echo, in which it basically exports text to a file. This is most often used when you're releasing projects. Someone else wants to run your project. Now, let's define our good old friends functions. Now, you should be very familiar with this from C or Java. It's very similar to that in which you declare a function. However, in Python, we define them as def, and then you basically use similar convention to Java or C. Instead of using curly brackets, you basically use a colon. This colon allows you to make the function, and you also have to make sure you do indentation. In Python, indentation is a very important part of the language itself, and if you're not careful, you may have indentation problems that may cause your program not to run properly. If you want to explicitly define a main function similar to C or Java, then you want to make sure that you basically declare if __ name __ equals __ main, and that. From there, you're able to define the function that you want to run every time you run your program. As is the example for this for screenshot 2, we also have a variable as well as a return type. Now, as I mentioned before, Python does not explicitly do types. However, it is very recommended to use types, especially when it comes to documentation. Python will normally ignore these types. However, it is a very wise choice to always explicitly define this, especially when you come back to this later. Now, there are very different type of comments within Python. There are the triple quotes, and there is the pound sign. The triple quotes work in a way where they allow you to, similar to Java's, asterisk / to close things out, allows you to make you a large amount of space for comments. Pound sign does a similar thing, but it's only line by line. Triple quotes are much more recommended for comments. Now, strings. Strings are immutable, which means that whenever you make a string, each instance is a new instance. Say, for example, let's say you're doing a string in C. Whenever you make a change to that, you're basically changing the data within that. However, in Python, you're not modifying the data. You're simply making a new copy of that string. Arrays. Arrays in Python are called lists, and there are two different ways to call them. The first example, storage list, where it is a regular list or a regular bracket in particular, it's a much more efficient way than calling lists, as this requires you to essentially call lists. It has to basically do a lookup, has to find that function, and then has to execute it. Loops are very similar to Java and C. However, there are a few exceptions. If you want a more Pythonic version of or similar to C or Java, you'd be using the enumerate function, which allows you to take whatever you're going to be looping through, and you're able to get the count and the value. Your count technically is like your C++, is your I++. Take, for example, in C, where the value is basically the actual values within that list. If you take a look at storage list count, that is essentially what value is in this example. Now, if you want to simply get the list, or if you want to simply loop through a list of sorts, you can also just do in, and that will allow you to loop through the values. This is also very useful, for example, if you want to do a dictionary, or if you want to loop through, you want to check to see if you use the in keyword, if you want to check to see if a word is in a particular instance of a string. Whenever you're doing for loops in particular, you always want to lead with the for. You either always want to include in, so you're able to loop through the entire thing. The in part is very important. Without it, Python will not be able to know that you actually want to go through the entire contents of what you're looking at. Now, dictionaries. Everyone's very familiar with hash maps in Java. If you're not, it's also a hash table in C. But dictionaries are a key value pair. And within Python, there's also two different ways to call dictionaries as well. There's the regular curly brackets, and then there's a dict. Again, I recommend personally the curly brackets as a much faster lookup. Now, whenever it comes to looping through a dictionary, you always want to be able, well, if you want to get both the key and the value, you want to be able to be very explicit. Whenever you're looping through a dictionary, you want to the first thing that you're going to be looping through is a key. The second thing you're going to be looping through is a value. It's this example. You're going to be going through the items. However, if you want the keys, for example, then you would get rid of storage value and replace storage items with storage.keys. You want the value, vice versa as well. Now, default dictionary. There will be a time whenever you want to basically do like different functionality with a dictionary. Whenever it comes to building a dictionary, you always want to see that if it doesn't exist in the dictionary, add it. However, default dictionary allows you to get outside of this, where you're able to basically just append to it, or you're able to include a default value. Let's say, for example, this picture right here. So what we're doing is we have a food list of apple, banana, and apple. And then we have a food count, which is the default dict of int. So we know this food count is going to be dictionary, and the value that's going to be using is an int. So we loop through the food list right here, and then we increment the food count, and we increment the value that we've seen: apple, banana, apple, +1 every time. And this is going to keep track of, if it's already there or not. It's going to do that for us. Now, classes in Python. Python is able to do object-oriented programming similar to Java, in which that you have to first define the class, and then you have to define the initialization method. Now, normally for initialization, you can use self. However, in this case, I decided to opt out using test. Now, personally, you don't have to include self. You can use any variable you want as the first part of the variable. You just have to use it for every other instance. For example, use test. You have to use that for every instance in that class of self. And with that in case, you're also able to make a class reference using the if you make the variable, and then you're able to call upon that class and pass in the values into the initialization. Okay. So now I guess we passed the introduction to Python, and now we're going to be looking at how is Python used in the background. I'm going to take a quick look to see if there are any questions at this moment. Yes, Ricardo. So the first one's more like a regular for loop, like Python and Java, where you're basically looping through and you're keeping track of an index. Yeah, it's very weird. It's one of the few languages doesn't define types. JavaScript has a very interpreted language system as well. However, you can still define types, and it will interpret it. Yeah, the second one is also for a for each instead of a regular for loop, Ricardo. Okay, so whenever you want to import a library in Python, essentially what you always want to do is import. You want to do import, and then you want to do the library name. So let's say, for example, you want to import requests, which is a commonality for backend. You do import requests, and this allows you to get all the functionality out of that library. So I'm going to get back to this presentation here, and I want to mention about how is Python used in the backend. So Python has many frameworks, but the most popular tends to be depending on your situation. Let's say, for example, you want to build a small API, very light, very flexible, and you don't want to rely on, you want to roll your own, you want to use your own SQL libraries, you want to use your own authentication libraries, that type of thing. I'd recommend a micro framework. Examples of these include Flask and Fast API. Personally, myself, I prefer Flask. However, Fast API is a framework that offers faster performance than Flask, and very similar performance to Node.js Express and Golang web libraries. Now, Django is a full-on framework, so it includes like SQL libraries, authentication, and views, and many different things. It's basically, take of an example like a big box, and it has a lot of things in it. Django would be this case because it comes with a lot of things that you will have to work around with. Me personally, I prefer the micro frameworks, and you can add things as you go. You don't have to worry about things that are included that you don't need. However, there are things in Django that I definitely feel are very great and definitely make it a lot easier. A case of this is the Object Relation Manager, which requires you to basically use a built-in set of features that curates SQL code for you. It's very helpful because you don't have to write raw SQL. However, you could always opt out to use Object Relation Manager that's publicly available as well with Flask or Fast API. However, it is an option considering Django or a micro framework, depending on your use case. No worries, yeah, definitely similar to Java. Okay, so I just want to show some examples between Flask and Django. So here is a Flask example of a GET request. A GET request essentially means that you're going to request data, and it's going to give you back data. As on the left, you have a app.route. A route is essentially is whatever follows after a /. So in this case, for example, let's say you're doing api.net/get dog breeds. The get dog breeds would be the route, and that would trigger whenever you go to that route. particular, in that case, you can see that both are very similar in code. The only difference is that Django has a very defined set of parameters where you have to return a response. You have to return a response from every view. However, Flask allows you to return the raw JSON response as if you wanted to. Okay, so here's some guys that will definitely help out with a lot with Flask. And a lot of these tend to most focus around making a blog, as well as some introductions such as rendering, authentication, and a myriad of other things. The default Flask guide is also very helpful, although I will have to warn that it is a bit bare bones at times, and it's always useful to always have different sources of truth in particular, as it helps make the experience a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to have my demonstration here. The source code for this workshop will be provided here at the link. I will also drop this down into the description as well. So I will do that right now, actually, so that everyone can follow along. So for this particular demo, we are going to code up a... Okay, can I see? Okay, it's over here. We're going to code up a API that essentially gets a dog image from a popular API called Dog CEO. Essentially, we're going to also introduce two different methods of getting data, where you're going to be getting from a query. So let's say, for example, you want to use like this here, dog equals corgi, for example. This is a method you would use for querying. You could also do it by JSON. Now, it's very important to be able to do by both formats, depending on if the front end is sending data or if you're sending it by requests, that kind of thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code here, and I'm going to start up here. Let me just save this as a Python file here real quick. And I'm going to make this API.py. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to import Flask. So from Flask, import Flask. We're also going to import a part of Flask, which is a module called request. This allows us to get data from the front end, or if you're doing curl or postman, this allows you to get that as well. We're also going to import requests as well. Requests here. This allows us to make get requests, post requests, put requests, delete requests, and allows us to get data from anywhere, actually. We're also going to import JSON, as we're going to need this to basically dump this. And then finally, we're going to, well, we have two more things about it. So we're going to import Flask cores, or Flask core. Yep, Flask cores. And then we're going to import cores. When you're running a front end and a back end together, you often get a cross-origin response. And this will basically be where it's trying to access on the same host. We're going to be using Flask cores to mitigate that. I basically implementing it so that we send back, hey, you can use this resource. There's no problem. And then the final import that we're going to use is from Flasker. Flasker import Swagger. Now, Swagger in particular is a framework that allows us to make a document type document tool in a way. It essentially allows us to provide documentation as well as query and do some other things. It's also very useful where you can also, in case you ever do authentication, you want to test out to see that your routes work properly and are properly authenticated. It's also very visually forward, since a lot of it you can basically execute commands. You can also take input and you'll be able to get a response. So the first thing I'm going to do after I do all these imports is I'm going to declare an app. In this case, our app is basically our initialization. So we're going to basically call the Flask app, and then we're going to pass it in a name. It basically does, this initializes our Flask app using the API.py. And we're also going to provide it a static URL path. Now, this allows us later on to use resources locally. Let's say, for example, you get the image, or you have an image you want to use on Flash side. Let's say you don't want to use a front end, you just want to render everything using the backend. So this will basically allow us to render images from local hosts or local storage and render that on the website. After that, I'm going to basically set up cores, and cores requires just simply the app. That's it. After that, I'm going to set up Swagger, and Swagger just requires you to set up a similar instance to cores, and then just pass in the app. Now, we also want to basically set up the main function here. And so we want to basically to name equals main here, because we want to run this on a specific port. Now, I personally recommend using the 8080 port if you plan on hosting this, because it allows you to use HTTPS. It's there's a big list of ports that are very secure with HTTPS certification, and it allows you to communicate back and forth. Most oftentimes, those are the type of ports that are being used. It's a very small list, so you can use any of those ports that you want. In this case, we're going to do app run, which allows to call our program on start, and then we're just going to do port equals 8080 for this example. Now, the port basically assigns it, so whenever we start this program, we're able to start it up in port 8080. Now we're actually going to start working on the actual code itself. So I'm going to look here, and it's going to, so we're going to first start off with app.route. So we want to define the route. In this case, I'm going to do as a dog. I'll do dog image in this case. And then we want to do a method here. Yes, method. It's always plural. And then you want to define a get here. Are there any questions so far? Oh, you want full screen. This is not full screen? Oh, you want full screen of the code. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So basically, we're going to have that here. And the reason why this is complaining is because we need a definition here. So we're going to do dog image, and then we are going to just simply do that there. Now, the first thing we want to define is we want to define how Flask is going to take this in. So let's say, for example, we're doing query style. Let me save that there. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we want to write a comment here. So fetch. Actually, let's just write our responses here. So responses are going to be what happens whenever we do this particular instance. So we want to basically always do responses, and then you want to do this particular response and then description. And from there, you can name it whatever. So successfully captured, got dog image, and then for description, get dog image. And then from there, we want to actually write the code itself. So what we're going to do is we are going to get, okay, let's see. Okay, so we're going to get the actual name provided by the user. So get this case, and that's going to be dog name. That's going to be request.args.get, and this is going to be provided by that. And for this particular case, it is, let's see, parameters. I'm getting. Okay, so it's very specific. So it's going to be parameters, and then from there, you're able to use this right here, the hyphen, and you're able to declare all this. So this is going to be dog name, and then it's going to be a int, so it's going to be a query. Okay, fine. It's going to be an int, so it's going to be provided by the user. Then the type is a string, and required is going to be true, since we need this in order to make sure that it works fine. And then from here, we're going to do a subspecies, because there are some dogs that do have subspecies available. we're going to provide a query. Type is going to be a string again. Required is going to be false this time, since we know in particular that whenever we pass it in, you don't necessarily need it. Some dogs don't have subspecies. So from there, we're able to get the dog name here. And then we need to check to see that it is being provided. If the request type, granted, we already have this here, but let's say, for example, we decide to change it. It's going to be request.method equals get. And then this would basically specify that every time that this particular instance is hit by a get request, which is the only time in this case, that we are going to basically grab this dog name that's being provided by Flasker. And then we are going to, from there, let me actually go to the official site here. So it's dog CEO. And we are going to get the random image here. We're going to scroll down. And in particular, we're going to copy this URL here. And we are now going to do dog image equals request.get. Import request? Oh, that's why. So yeah, since it's a standalone library, we're going to have to import that. So I did not grab the right URL. Okay. So we're going to put that in there. And then from there, we're going to use something called an f-string. An f-string allows us to basically make like temporary, placements, and it allows you to manipulate that specific thing. So we have the dog name. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically do 2 brackets, and we're going to do dog name here. And now every time we do the request, it's just going to populate using the dog name here. And then you want to get rid of this and making sure that it's the whole URL. From there, we now have the image, and all we want to do is essentially just return it. So just return dog image. And we're done with this dog image here. Now, in order to run this, we're going to have to basically open up our command line. You may have a terminal on Linux, on Mac as well, or Windows command prompt. Now, we're going to basically use Python and then api.py. Okay, I remember changing that. Okay. Now, since we specified earlier that it's going to be running on 127.0.0.1, 8080, that's where we're going to be heading off to. So we're going to head off there. Copy this here. And we're going to go off to here. Now, it's not specified because we have to actually go to a specific URL called API docs. Not specified to the spec. Oh, that's why. Okay. Yeah, you got to be very careful with triple quotes here. You got to make sure they always end. Try that again. Okay. Did I not do this right? Because, oh, okay. I see what I did wrong. I have to provide this right here. This allows us to basically separate this out to be YAML. Try that again. There we go. Okay. Let's remove that. I guess I forgot to reload the instance here. Okay. Let's restart that there real quick. Okay. This is a dog image. I guess I always need to provide comments, which makes sense, I guess. Be able to refresh there. And here we have it. So as you see, dog name is required and subspecies is not. So let's press try it out. And we're going to type in Corky. And by executing it, we're able to get. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. So the key problem that we're having here in particular is the fact that we have this dog.json, but it's not really returning anything in particular. So we're going to basically cast this to grab the data from the JSON. And by doing that, I have to reload this again. Okay, so let's try that again. And it's going to be cookie. Okay, so now that we have that, we are able to get the image that we got, and we're also able to get the corgi as well. And if you open up this URL for this image, you will see that you will get a corgi. As you can see right here. I'm going to stop for a little bit before we continue on to see if there's any questions. Any questions so far? Any concerns? Problems? Yep. Awkward programmers write lots of docs. I'm not going to answer that, Albert. Okay, so let's move on to another part. So this is the query part, which is usually done that way. Now, okay, so we want to make another method in particular. This time, we're going to take in JSON data. So I'm going to do JSON. And we're going to also do this by using methods, which is get. So let's see. Let me write their comment. Now, Python in particular doesn't really like having more than 2 spaces, so it's always recommended to at least have 1 space available, or at least depending on your linter if you have it installed. Now we're just going to do JSON, and we're going to basically check again. We're going to check again this time because this time this is not going to be provided on Flasker. We're going to be passing in data from JSON. So what we want to do is, first of all, we want to get the request. So if you remember, we had imported a library up here called requests. And this request allows us to see all the data that's being passed in. So what we want to do is, again, check to see if, yes, this is a get request. So you just want to see if request.method equals get. And then once you're on there, you basically want to do, you can call this whatever you want, but in this case, I'm going to call it content, and we're going to do request.json. Now, this allows us to get all the JSON being passed in from the specific instance. And in this case, I'm going to do, I guess, first name equals content, name, and then last name equals content, last name. And then from here, I'm going to return a JSON dump. So this basically returns a JSON file. I wouldn't say a file, but essentially a JSON string from the data provided here. And then I'm going to do an F string, and then I'm going to do hello, first name, last name. Okay, so we have that done. I guess I would just rename this to hello. Hello worked fine. You can do a bunch of others if you want, but I think for this example, since I want to go with the hello, get the first name, last name. Now that we have that, let's see if I have. I have this program called Postman, which allows you to send out GET requests, POST requests, PUT requests, as well as delete requests from your API. And so we're working with JSON. Okay, I'll wait till it loads. We're working with JSON. I want to, first up, I want to close out of this, and I want to create a request. Since we're using a GET request, okay, that's not what we want. We are going to grab this URL. And we know that in particular, this is going to be HTTP 127.0.0.1 8080/hello. Now we're going to move over here quickly to the body, and we're going to send in a raw, but we're not going to send in text. We're going to send JSON. So as mentioned before, we have this first name and last name here. So we want to open up a curly bracket, first name, Abraham, last name, Nevarez. Okay, from here, okay, no, that's fine. The request here. I think it's because I'm supposed to make the post request. Yeah, that's what it was. So instead of doing a GET request like we did last time, since we're sending data to the server, we want to make this a POST request. So we change that method, and I have to reload the server here since it's not available yet. Change that method and send a POST request. Attribute has, okay. Oh, that's why. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I guess in that case, we can just specify it as a post. We just always want to make sure that we know if it's being a post or a GET request. We're not really returning a page or anything. We're going to send this data. The method is not allowed. Oh, right. This is a post request. So send out. Non-type object is not scriptable. Okay. Okay, I guess I'll take this off. I'm not sure why it's non-scriptable, but okay, Control-Shift-Tab. Okay, do that again. Let me just make sure this is the right. I think it's, okay. Oh. No? I'll just send a first name for now. Oh wait, I see why. It's in JavaScript. Okay. Okay. And we're going to send Nevarez. Here, we're going to send the data. And hello, Abrahan Nevarez. Now, in particular, always remember when you're sending data, most often than not, you'll be sending, particularly in the front end, you'll be sending JSON data. So that's usually the data you want to parse. And that concludes our demo for this presentation. I'm now going to switch over to questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yep, always don't forget to fill out the type form, very important, especially for the workshop here. Yes, Victoria, Postman is amazing. There is an alternative if you want to use it if you prefer the command line. It is called curl. I usually do not recommend it unless you want to do it all. Thunder Client is also a very good client as well, instead of using Postman. I think it's available on Mac. The type form is, so if you see my, let me show you my screen, I guess, here. If you see here, it'll be on the type form right here. If you go to Events, My Agenda, and then Session. And then you go to type form right here. Now, I believe if you fill this out, you, okay, it does count as an entry for a prize. So I'm not exactly sure how that works entirely. Yeah, again, like I said, if you guys have any questions, oh, it'll be drawing. That makes sense. Makes sense. If you have any questions about Python, about Flask in particular, I'll be able to answer any questions you may have. Albert, unfortunately, I do not want to do this with Spring Boot. This is not the time nor the place. I'm sorry. Anyone else have any other questions in particular? Any suggestions on particular frameworks, I guess, for hackathon? Because I know backend tends to be more common, but I know some people also do game development or AI or data science as well. So I'm definitely free to answer that as well. Okay. I'm assuming there's no questions or any of the likes. So, yep. I think I believe I provided my. Okay, did I provide the link for the GitHub for the repo? Yes, I did. Okay, definitely feel free to check that out, experiment with that as well. It's always good to have some sort of documentation source, especially when you're working with other developers in case they want to see how the backend takes input, as well as parsing. I would also recommend for Python beginners as well to install a linter of sorts. Most popular tends to be Flake 8, as well as a formatter of sorts if you're working with multiple developers, so you can have some sort of consistent workflow. A popular formatter for that is Black. Okay. Again, since there are no more questions, then I guess that concludes our workshop for today for Introduction to Python. I hope everyone has learned a new thing. If you're an experienced developer as well, I hope I have taught you something new or might have refreshed your knowledge on a specific instance. No worries, Albert. Thank you guys for coming to my workshop. I definitely appreciate it. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and I hope that you all are able to present a demo, and I wish you all the best of luck.